So we do have a guest speaker today that I'll be introducing shortly. I'm going to take a few minutes of your time up front just to explain NovaBACKUP a little bit before we get started. But our topic today will cover the benefits and revenue generating opportunities for MSPs that serve customers dealing with regulatory compliance. So our guest speaker will also be covering many of the risks and rewards associated with taking on these types of customers. This revenue is brought to you by NovaBACKUP, and so NovaBACKUP works through MSP partners such as yourselves to deliver premier local and cloud-based backup solutions. We differentiate with a high level of technical service. All of our technical people have MSP experience, and we have a very flexible license and pricing models that we offer to better suit in how you run your business. We do have cookie cutters to keep things simple, but we can also break the mold a little bit to help suit your business. There's sometimes some confusion between NovaBACKUP and NovaStore. So a quick history lesson. NovaBACKUP started in mid-2019 as a spin-off from NovaStore. And NovaStore has provided backup data protection solutions for well over 20 years. NovaStore actually created the first Windows-based cloud backup solution in the market. So if you're old like me, you may recall we used to refer to you as ASPs, application service providers, instead of MSPs. Times have changed a little. We're also the name behind some of the first online cloud backup services that were out there by providers like AOL and even Compaq, who are now names from the past, which is now HP. So NovaBACKUP is new, but we do have a very reliable history and a lot of experience working with our software as well. NovaBACKUP was launched specifically for the MSP market in 2019. So especially the vertically focused MSPs that target professional offices that must adhere to some form of regulatory compliance. So for example, today we support over 30,000 healthcare practices, and very heavy on the dental side, but we do this through our great partnerships. We don't deal directly with these kind of partners. So this brings me to our topic today a little. Through our experience working with MSPs to support all these healthcare practices that we have, our team is well versed in handling protected health information, PHI, and understands what it takes to maintain, HIPAA, or the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, getting compliance for that, as well as several other compliances like FERPA or PCI, things along in that nature. So we're very familiar with your typical customers' IT infrastructures, what data needs to be protected and how it needs to be protected, and most importantly, how it can be quickly recovered. We understand the important role that you play for your customers and are very familiar with the importance of things like business associates agreements and things like that we'll be covering a little during this presentation. In 2020, during some global, I guess you could say, unscheduled work from home time, we took some things even a step further here at NovaBACKUP. Instead of having you just take our word about how great we were when it came to compliance, we reached out to the experts, a neutral third party, to certify that not only our product, but that our team and our internal processes satisfied all the requirements of being HIPAA compliant. So these experts that we used are the Compliancy group. They're the producers of the GUARD, an industry-leading HIPAA compliant software for both covered entities and business associates. They certified NovaBACKUP with a seal of approval as being HIPAA verified. Their team of experts worked closely with our team to make certain that our solution and the people supporting it fully understood and took the precautions necessary to help you maintain HIPAA compliancy for your customers' data. So our guest speaker today is Paul Redding from the Compliancy group. Paul is Compliancy Group's VP of Partner Engagement and Cybersecurity, a long title there. In a past life, just like many of you, Paul had experience working successfully as an owner-operator of his own MSP for 14 years, and their business was focused on the healthcare space. So he kind of is an expert from all angles. So we look forward to gleaning from what Paul has to share. So without further ado, welcome, Paul, and nice to have you here with us today.
Thanks so much, Mike. Really appreciate the invite to join you today. And thanks to everybody out there for attending. It's a real pleasure to be here. As Mike said, my name is Paul Redding. I am Vice President of Long Titles at Compliancy Group. My role at Compliancy Group is kind of dual, hence the title. I am partner engagement. That means I work with MSPs, MSSPs, but just as importantly, vendors and the tools and service sets that are in the MSP community, such as, for example, NovaBACKUP. And in that role, I'm there to kind of facilitate the channel and help it grow. And then on the other side, I did, as Mike said, I spent about 14 years deep in that MSP space. Our primary deliverables all went into healthcare and actually Department of Defense manufacturing. So I spent a lot of time kind of digging through the nerd side of this stuff, trying to help people figure out what the best solutions are to put in place that will actually align with laws like, for example, HIPAA that we're talking about today. If you guys are not familiar with Compliancy Group, sorry, I jumped ahead. If you're not familiar with Compliancy Group, we are a 15, now 16-year plus player in the healthcare space, something of an industry standard. That seal of compliance that Mike was talking about, you'll find our seal of compliance on NovaBACKUP's website. You'll find it on MSP partners. You're also going to find it on groups like, for example, the Pax8s of the world use us to validate and verify their HIPAA compliance. So that seal is what we give you when you complete our process. And it means that we've gone through and gone through what we're going to talk about today, not just the IT portion. I think that's a place where the MSP community as a whole has a pretty good handle on what really needs to be done to secure in a compliant way this data. But we take it farther. We actually help these organizations, yours, theirs, whoever, comply with the rest of the law. What people call the soft side of HIPAA, the policies, procedures, administrative stuff that you've got to accomplish, right? Now, that leads to why you as a service provider, you as an MSP or MSSP out there, want to work with organizations like ours or work in a space that's compliant. Because if you take a look at what we do on a daily basis, working with healthcare groups of all shapes and sizes, what we're ultimately doing is putting them through a process that validates and justifies all the things that you as a provider sell. You see, on the standard market, let's say outside of the regulated spaces, if you go in and you try to talk about your advanced security stack, it's really a collection of, let's call them suggestions. You and your, as they see it, kind of nerd infinite wisdom out here in this weird world that they don't understand, come in with a bunch of tech stuff that they don't have already. And so the typical business out there really views this as kind of somewhere between all that stuff you're talking about and as you say, nothing they have right now is where they need to land. And so in a traditional business sense, a lot of the tech decisions get based exclusively on cost. I know as an MSP, I had many, many conversations with people where I knew what I was trying to talk them into getting was something that they needed to really secure their environment, but they couldn't hear me. What compliance does for you by talking to them about it, by being compliant yourself, and then helping your clients achieve this, what it does is it changes those suggestions into mandates under the law. The reality is that compliance is calling out all of the tech tools and all of the things that you're trying to put in these client environments, and it specifically says in order to comply with this thing, you have to address them, right? And so what that looks like, because HIPAA or any compliance standard is somewhat technologically vague, if you look at it at a high level, it's hard to see exactly what tech solutions to put in place. But if you look at the primary things that they require for all business, the way that the law lists it, access controls, endpoint protection, monitoring and auditing, network security, right? All those things, if you take a look back into your solution sets, access control. I mean, look, guys, this is your Azure or your Active Directory. This is also your multi-factor authentication. These are the ways who gets access to what and where and the controls you put there. Endpoint protection. It's funny, the law does not say antivirus any more than usually the modern MSP does. It says protect the endpoints. Guys, that's where your EDR, your MDR, all those things come in. I don't know about you, but again, as an MSP, I have never had any success trying to explain to a customer, even that needs it, what the heck SOC or SIM or MDR is, right? They just don't understand the concepts or the impotence behind it. But monitoring and auditing is called out specifically under the law. Logging is going to have to be there, just like your network security. But then there's one more that the law calls out, which is why a group like NovaBACKUP is not only so keen to work with us, but to talk to you guys about this opportunity as a whole. The law requires that all PHI data that is taken in must be recoverable, and it says it's got to be recoverable quickly. In 2020, in the middle of this whole pandemic, the law was actually changed to shrink the window of time that a medical provider has to get me my healthcare records back. So in 2019, if I asked you as a doctor, hey, I need all the medical records, I'm going to somebody else, you had 30 days to turn around and get me that before you started incurring fines. It's 15 now. So imagine an environment where, this doctor or this medical group out there still thinks that grabbing an external hard drive, ripping all their stuff over to it and taking it off site at night is adequate. Or those old tape drives that have always worked and kind of grown dust in the corner. Without a solution like a NovaBACKUP in place, your client cannot realistically restore and comply with this law. The law no longer is really, if you're thinking about calling out backup and disaster, it's business continuity. You've got to be able to not only say you've got it, but you've got to be able to hand that stuff over. And folks, the controls you see, the rules I'm talking about, yes, they apply to your clients. But if you have one single medical customer, and that can mean a lot. If you have one single medical customer, all of this applies to you too. You're under the HIPAA law as well. This is why MSP partners work with us. Now, don't think when we talk about healthcare today, and it's kind of our primary thing that we're going to dwell on here, that this is the only regulated market out there. Matter of fact, as you kind of heard me say in the beginning, I actually come mostly out of healthcare with a strong splash of Department of Defense manufacturing. The reason that Compliancy Group talks to MSPs so consistently about healthcare, the reason that we encourage teams like yours to go out and start attacking this vertical first, is because it's arguably the most perfect vertical market out there for the MSP of today. You see, healthcare is way bigger than just doctors. As a matter of fact, pre-COVID, healthcare was already almost 30% of the US economy. Now, I think everybody knows there's not 30% of the US economy or like 6 million doctors out there actively working. No, in fact, healthcare is made up of a majority of the vendors, excuse me, that support the sector. So, accountants, lawyers, MSPs like you, billing agencies, call centers, all these organizations that work in the healthcare space, and the way the law says it, can conceivably interact with healthcare data, all of them are under this law. And unlike, let's say, finance or manufacturing and a couple of these others, where let's pick on manufacturing for a second, that sector is dominated financially by a few very massive corporations at the top that trickle down revenue to the subprimes below. Healthcare is the opposite. It's an inverted pyramid. Healthcare is made up of 5, almost 6 now, million small businesses. This is under 250 users, privately held organizations that are out there to work with groups like yours. They're under attack. It's the most heavily hit with ransomware. It's the most heavily exfiltrated data on the planet. And because of all that, the government is going after them. More fines are levied in healthcare than any other regulated sector, and it's only going to increase. One of the reasons for this, if you really think about it, let's take the giant crisis in 2020. Folks, it was a healthcare crisis that only gets resolved by pumping more money into the healthcare sector, which is a sector that's only going to grow regardless of economic fallout. You see, if the federal government shells out, let's say 6, 8, $10 trillion to bail out the private sector, they've got to be able to come get some of that money back from somewhere. And the only way the healthcare that the government has of recouping income is what? taxes, and regulatory compliance. If you know that there's this sector out there, healthcare, it's under attack by hackers every day, so we know bad things are happening, and they're failing their audits at a 94% rate, you increase the enforcement, you increase the audits, and you recoup your money out of a sector that's got it to give.
Yeah,
That's
Just wanted to make a comment here, and that's why I felt it was so important to have you on today. Is that people, including myself before, I always associated HIPAA with just healthcare, but as you point out, it touches so many other things. And some of my examples that we've run into where we sell through education. On the education side, they still are holding immunization records of children, so it's still health related. We have counties that we're selling to, and a lot of these counties are responsible for the jails, courthouses, things like that, and they have all the medical records of the inmates, things like that. So it's quite far reaching, and that's why I thought it would be interesting to our MSP base to learn about this.
I'll even add to that something that a lot of people don't factor in, Mike. That's a well-made point. It, any organization processing this medical data inside becomes it becomes under HIPAA and in healthcare. So if you do your own workman's compensation, you're in healthcare. That means back to, like, let's say verticals that can be attacked. The manufacturing sector is famous for wanting to do their own workers' comp. It's a lot more affordable for them to process that stuff through, but that means that they take in all those medical records. And I can tell you right now, the business associates, that's the non-direct medical people under this law, in many cases are a better sale and often even a better fit for the MSP community than some of these weird healthcare specialties, right? You can go both directions. As an MSP, I really liked selling into, optometry. The Compliancy group is endorsed by the American Dental, for example. So that's a place where we have strong presence. But if you take a look at software providers, backup providers, all those other groups out there, it's amazing because the reality is, for a doctor, healthcare takes away pain of something they know they've got to deal with. But for those business associates, it's like go or no go. You can't work in an industry where you make revenue, where a lot of your business comes from, if you're not compliant with this law. And Mike, back kind of to the discussion of data protection here, I would imagine that out of all especially I know you have a huge presence in dental, I imagine you guys see a lot of restoration after ransomware, or at least a lot of attacks that you have to help people resolve, right?
Yeah, and unfortunately we do. It's getting to almost be a weekly or even more frequent instance for us, and we have a team that's working pretty much around the clock to help a lot of these people get their data back. And it's not typically part of a service of backup, but it is, because the restoration is the most important part of backup, and we definitely are experiencing that daily. And like you said, if we line up all of our vertical markets that we sell, all the sectors, healthcare is by far and above the highest affected.
It's terrible too in its own way what's happening to the sector without some support, and where it's going to head. Because if you look at it, so ransomware is up 5 times over where it was in 2020 already. I mean, it's becoming epidemic at this point. And if you talk to the people running these organizations, even let's pick on hospital administrators for a second. So, kind of arguably one of the more sophisticated groups within this space, they will honestly tell you when surveyed, they have no idea what to do about it. These guys that are running these healthcare groups, in most cases, weren't hired into IT for their talent in cyber risk. They were hired into IT because they can make the EHR talk to Windows. So I know a lot of MSPs out there are very heavy on the co-manage, that whole commit trend that's starting to emerge, that drives a lot of revenue in the space right now. Healthcare can be an absolutely perfect opportunity for commit as well, because take, for example, your backup solutions. Being able to go into even a large scale medical administrator and say, can I take the backups off your plate completely? We have a fully HIPAA compliant system. We factor in all our compliance with this. It's going to be tested by professionals so that when something terrible happens, we can restore you consistently, quickly, and we know it's going to work, right? One of the problems that addresses is, for example, not all data theft anymore is designed to steal your credit card or remove your identity or even get your ransom. So if you back up 4 or 5 years ago, and Mike and I would be having this talk with people, we would all be about the idea that somebody's going to come get your data and you got to pay them $10,000. Then you fail your audit. No, the problem is now, in like on the West Coast last year, a ransomware attack at a hospital meant they had to turn away all their heart patients and all their critical care patients for an entire day. People died on the way to other hospitals, right? So we're starting to see a place where the problems between compliance and security and the gap that gets left if you only try to address one but not the other is coming to a head, and it's damaging our entire country and our infrastructure. Now, I'm not so cynical. I know everybody probably caught that I said that there's a 94% failure rate in the market. If you are audited under healthcare, you almost assuredly fail your audit. That's how it's always been. I don't believe that's because everyone is deliberately non-compliant. The problem is there's a language gap. When you talk to whether it's a business associate or a doctor and you say, are you HIPAA compliant? What they jump to is security, your job as an MSP, but they're skipping this first step, which is actual compliance, okay? So compliance is adherence to a law. We're not going to do a ton on the details of the law today, but at a high level, HIPAA itself is a series of rules broken into almost 1,000 pages of documentation written by lawyers to be interpreted by other lawyers. It's dense, it's technologically vague, and it requires security, but it doesn't necessarily say what security means. Now, security, the actual thing it's asking for, this is risk management. It's shades of gray. Instead of binary yes, no questions, you're right or wrong, it's what? Let's be real, folks. It's controlled by your budget, your skill set, and your risk profile. So if you were to take SOX compliance, for example, and the security requirements there, Nike and Boeing are both multi-billion-dollar companies, publicly traded, they're under SOX rules. But the security components of the SOX rules say Nike can run out of money for security well before Boeing, because Nike makes tennis shoes and Boeing makes missiles. They're worried about making you safe. These two things go together. That's why compliance mandates security in order to prevent you from getting fined if something happens, and security is there to limit your risk in the first place. If your client wants to be secure and safe, it takes both of these, just like it takes both for your MSP. Now I'm going to show you why everybody screws this up, guys. It's as simple as 3 little rules, but it goes so far. It's so far reaching. The problem again is I say, are you HIPAA compliant? And the typical answer from a customer out there would be, yes. I called my IT guy. They did a risk assessment. Okay. Folks, a risk assessment goes under one of the 3 rules. HIPAA is broken into the privacy rule. I think everybody understands it, but that stack of paperwork that says if they can tell your spouse or other people about your medical treatment, that's all privacy rule. And there's a series of audits that have to be done under that rule. Then there's the security rule, and it's not just IT. The security rule covers things like, yes, your IT risk assessment and your device audit, that's 2 audits, but you have other audits around the actual building. Somebody's supposed to go through and dig through the trash, look at the clipboards, make sure the organization is functioning in a secure way. And then lastly, over here on the right, we got that weird word. It's called the omnibus rule. You guys are never going to forget it when I tell you this piece. Just think about it as the on the bus rule. If your client is on this HIPAA bus, get your butt on the bus with them. You're in healthcare too. It's why you care today. It's why you're here to listen and learn and figure out what you can do for your own compliance. But it's also what drags in all those other business associates that we talked about and makes them have to trade out those contracts called the business associate agreements. So you see what happens is you say, are you HIPAA compliant? The client thinks I called IT. IT does their job, and MSP does their job, everything they are really capable of doing for them. But what they're leaving out is what you call the soft side of HIPAA, and this is what hits the hardest. The vast majority of fines, over 85% of fines, are actually issued around lack of doing risk assessments. There's 6 total audits you have to do every year, not 2. A lack of policies and procedures, or worse, policies and procedures that don't reflect your organization, groups that go out and just download some template somewhere and don't modify, Or lastly, you got the policies and procedures, you stuck them in a folder back here, and nobody in your organization has any idea what they say. You are obligated under the law to train every member of your organization from top down, all on their HIPAA requirements and the policies and procedures you put in place. So without this, that IT risk assessment that was supposed to tell you what's wrong and give you a list of things to fix through policy, without it, it's just a list of things they should fine you for. Without the policies, procedures, and administrative functions, you can't show your work, if you will. I actually equate compliance to algebra 2 because it's the only class I failed in high school the first time I took it. In algebra 2, you must show your work. I would have the right answers, but my teacher would beat me up with a red ink pen because I couldn't show my work. That's what happens to people in compliance. So in order to comply, what does it take for you? Okay, guys, there's no such thing as HIPAA light. It's just a great way to fail an audit, just like any virus by itself is a great way to get hacked, okay? What you must do is everything under the law, which starts with all audits, not just the IT, fixing all the problems that come out of it. Now, admittedly, as you see over here on the right, a lot of the problems that come out of those audits are going to be your stack. But for everything that there's not, you've got to help the client or internally do your policies, your procedures, your employee management and training, and all that contract management. And then lastly, what happens when bad things happen to you? It can determine the rest of your life. Your incident and breach response program must be correct, or no matter what you did to protect yourself, you incur these millions and millions of dollars of fines when just frankly, bad things happen to good people. This guy right here is a perfect example of why they're about the policies and procedures first. Okay, folks, a couple of years ago, I don't know if everybody remembered it, but the Hawaii Emergency Management Association sent out notifications to everyone in the state that nuclear missiles were on their way from North Korea. And it even said, this is not a drill. Right before that happened, this gentleman right here got a job he was very proud of running that software. He was so proud, he said somebody take a picture, put it as his Facebook profile with his password stuck on the screen behind him. Now, they weren't under HIPAA, but HIPAA would have saved them. Regulatory compliance would have saved them. How, you ask? Simple. What I say regulatory requirements are: a risk assessment. Somebody would have walked through that organization, seen this on the screen and said, that is not acceptable. Policies. Why is it not acceptable? Because we have a policy that says you can't stick your password to the screen in the room. And more importantly, we have a procedure you've been trained on for how to manage your credentials correctly. If that had happened, then this doesn't take place. So it's not this gentleman's failing, it's the organization falling down on the soft side. And folks, if you're not in healthcare, don't think that this doesn't apply to you too. I know we focused on healthcare today and the need to go out and comply with that law. And again, if you have any medical client whatsoever, you've got to do the stuff that we're talking about, but compliance is coming for us all. This is 10 right now. I'm sure you guys know about the California Privacy Act. I'm sure you've heard of New York Shield. I don't know if you're in Louisiana, you're going to be legally required to register as an MSP in some cases in Louisiana. And there's a total of all these other states, I think it's about 7 other states that have current IT privacy laws and 18 more pending. So eventually, folks, whatever industry you're working in, if they're touching sensitive data, the concepts that we're working on today, the things that we're talking about today, and adhering to compliance, and more importantly, taking the conversation about compliance to your customers first, it's critically important and it'll change your business. The MSP of the future is going to either be a collection of tools that kind of have a price set and is used to fix little things in IT, or what I call a business solution provider, someone that understands the face of the market, someone that understands the verticals that they sell to, and can say, I can shield you this, not just through security, but by bringing in compliance, bringing it to bear, and helping you benefit your business. Now, as we kind of go towards wrapping up today, I'm going to point something out about the presentation that didn't happen all the way through today. I did not spend my entire time listing off millions of dollars of fines. I can do it. I can list a whole series of breaches. And if you go to compliancygroup.com, we have a breach report that you can pull down and see how horrible this has gotten in many cases. But that won't help you sell, and it's not going to help your business right now. Okay. What is going to help you both in your business and your clients is to see the benefits to compliance. Talk to your customers, not about the fear, but about the idea that, again, taking that Hawaii example, compliance makes your business better. It requires you to look at all the ways you can get hurt, at least on an annual basis, and fix them, right? It requires that you document and build out well-written and well-organized policies and procedures. And great idea, train your employees on it. Tell them what their job is and be able to therefore hold them accountable. That's wonderful, because what it does is it creates a corporate culture that mirrors, for example, a NovaBACKUP. What do you see when you look at them? What do you hear when you talk to them? You hear an organization that talks with compliance and privacy and security first in their minds. You hear uniformity of thought around these things, and you see a corporate culture that ultimately you want to work with. Whether you are a doctor or an MSP or a lawyer, I, as a consumer, want to work with an organization with a strong corporate culture and a focus and concern for my privacy. It's 2021. We're moving forward to a place where this is a conversation we should all be having. Where is my data and how is it being protected? Through both compliance and security, you as the MSP or the MSSP of tomorrow are uniquely poised to answer that question. Mike, back to you, sir. Ooh, Mike, you might be on mute. Still there?
Okay. I have two devices that I muted, so I'm back.
Most common phrase in the English language of today. You're on mute.
That's right. So anyway, yeah. So that was a great overview. Thanks for that, Paul. And definitely, that's why we went through this process. And this isn't a one-day process or where you fill in a multiple choice question online or things like that. This is actually quite a large internal process, and it also involves all employees. And there's different stages, changing of policies, things like that, that we had to go through in order to become what we call HIPAA compliant. And any company out there can claim that they're HIPAA compliant, and especially in the backup world, HIPAA and a lot of these other compliancies, backup and data protection is a very small part of those thousands of pages that you were talking about. But it's not necessarily, is the data protected? Is it not accessible? Can it be recovered? Things like that. But it's also the company behind the data who's protecting it is taking the precautions. And that's the one thing you can take away too, is that we're taking every step we can to ensure that your data and the things that we're helping you with are going to be HIPAA compliant, but that still doesn't protect you entirely as far as being HIPAA compliant, because we can only control our own environment, and it is upon you as the MSPs and anybody else that you do business with, other vendors, things like that, to be able to have this level of compliancy, to be able to support your customers properly, so you're not dragged in on the bus, I guess you could say, with your clients. So yeah, Paul, that was a great presentation, and we're happy to have you on board here. And I just wanted to maybe go ahead and see if there's any questions that were on there, see if there's anything that needs to be answered. If there are no questions, we can always go about, you can always ask questions at any time, and pretty much we'll get back to you with answers. So I guess one of the questions we got here are, what are the most common HIPAA violations, and how are HIPAA violations investigated? I guess that's obviously for you, Paul.
The most common HIPAA violations that end in fines, let's put it that way, are actually your failures to do your audits and your failures to review or implement policies. What leads to the whole thing, though, it's almost always a functional thing inside the organization. It can be something as simple as trash management. It can be something as simple as an angry patient reports something they either think or allege that they saw. One of the things about the law is that any alleged incident is legally required to be investigated. So sadly, what we see a lot of times is relatively minor infractions on the front end lead to investigations that unearth larger functional problems. So if I were going to summarize, I would say human error is the most common thing that happens.
Okay. Okay. And then there's a question here regarding the 3-2-1 backup rule that I think everybody drops or talks about. And I think 3-2-1 backup rule, for those who don't know what it is, it's kind of one of these standard things that every backup company talks about. And that's having 3 total copies of your data on hand, 2 different media devices, so your data is on 2 different devices that you can track separately, and having 1 copy off-site. And that's more or less just part of the equation. And you know, like all of these other rules, things always get added on to the end. And I've seen it as far as going 3-2-1-1-0 added to it. And what that means, especially when you get into kind of these kind of regulations and the world we live in, like ransomware attacks and things like that, is you need your three copies of data are still recommended on 2 different media devices, 1 being off-site, but 1 also being offline. And that's what they call air gapped. And that's so if anybody is hacking or doing malware or ransomware, if as long as 1 copy of your data is offline, they can't access that. And that's kind of your last line of defense. And I guess the true last line of defense is the 0 in this equation, is the make sure that there's 0 errors in your backups. And that means that you should verify your backups. And there's tools within our software and with most of our competitor software as well that you can actually do a backup verification. I recommend you do that, because that means that what that really measures is your ability to recover data, which is so important for these types of compliances. So the 3-2-1-1-0 backup rule, I guess, is what I'd go with to answer that question. Paul, I also see that you're in your title, that long title that you're talking about, your client, your partner engagement, but you're also a VP of cybersecurity. Is there detail on that why you would feel it's so important to add that to your title?
Well, okay, first of all, I didn't set my title. It might be a little shorter had I done so. No, I really do. I have 2 roles, though. One of the problems that the overall community has is the translation between compliance and security. When they ask these weird gray questions over here in the compliance side, how does that equate to your stack? Where does you as an MSP, where do all these technologies kind of line up with their legal requirements? I spend a lot of my time helping navigate that. And then, you know, I like to emphasize this to the community at large, because I don't like to misrepresent. You know that expression, those who can't do, teach? That's this dude right here. I speak technology fluently and am really able probably to understand it very well, but I've never been a systems administrator or an engineer at the level that some of these other guys do. I've always worked in and around and through those folks. So most of the time I can kind of provide a nice bridge between your very advanced technical folks over here and sometimes even the customer that just doesn't quite get where you're going with this.
Okay. Okay. Also, another question here. I'll answer the first part of this, but hand it off to you, Paul. It's also kind of what is the importance of a BAA or business associates agreement? And just to start off with that, is that NovaBACKUP and NovaStore, what we do is we do stand behind our MSPs and partners. And in the HIPAA world, a business associates agreement is required in most anybody who's touching the patient data. And with backup being part of that, we do have access. We can't read, but we do, in many cases, host that patient data. We do sign business associate agreements with our partners, and I believe a lot of our partners are going to be signing it with their customers as well. But is there more information on a BAA that you can provide, Paul?
Well, Mike, you said that really well. I think you hit it well. What I'll add, I guess, to that is here's the deal. A business associate agreement is not a contract where a medical group is asking you to take on liability. When you work with the medical group, you have already accepted the liability. What a business associate agreement is designed to do is establish whose liability is what. It legally lines out You do you and I do me. So it's meant to be a buffer, for example, between human error at the clinic leading to violations by the MSP. Where people get, I guess you would say, kind of upside down with this thing is I run into a lot of MSPs that go, well, I work with medical groups, but I've never signed a business associate agreement, so I'm good with this whole HIPAA thing, right? No, 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 no. The problem is your medical group is in violation of the law because they are required to have this business associate agreement on file with you, and you are a vendor in the space that, if this whole thing were to be audited or investigated, obviously does not understand what's happening in healthcare and your own requirements. So would you be dragged into an audit because you had a bunch of medical clients and you didn't have BAAs with them? Conceivably. If one of those is the reason that there's a breach and they even remotely try to point to you, almost assuredly. So it's critical, if you do nothing else, if you work with a medical group, if they don't give you one, then you need to give them one.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, and I believe that's. I promised we'd try and stick it to around 40 minutes today, and we're running up against that thing. There are a few more questions here, but we'll definitely get the answers back to you. Once again, Paul, I appreciate your time today, and I appreciate all of your time for attending as well. You can see all of our contact information now up on the screen. As I said, we will get back to you if you do want to speak to Paul further about anything to do with compliancy, or myself on the backup side of things. I'm always happy to talk of business. I've been doing this for well over 20 years, so it's in my blood. And we are showing our HIPAA seal of a compliance there because we are proud of that. We are one of the only vendors pretty much one of the only vendors who actually has taken it serious enough to go to this level to be able to prove that we are looking out for our customers. So any final words there, Paul?
No, I want to thank everybody again for attending today. Mike, I want to thank you specifically for inviting us. Very happy, very proud to have you as a client. And I think your partner is very lucky that you guys are willing to go out there and, absorb that, take it so seriously and help them lower their own risk.
All right. Well, thank you, Paul, again. And on that note, thanks to everybody else again, and I wish you all the best. Take care.
Awesome.